Hello everyone, my name is Marcus Boddy and I'm Head of Brand and Insight at Tonic. I've spent about the last 15 years of my career helping people with EVPs and employer brands in all sorts of different geographies and all sorts of different industries, and indeed for all sorts of different purposes. Um, and there's a question I'd like to talk to you about today, which is one that keeps on coming up with clients and potential clients. And it's really about what does and doesn't belong in an EVP model. And there's a lot of opinion you can read about this, but I think an awful lot of it's very idealistic. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to give you my thoughts and advice on what does and doesn't matter when you're trying to decide what goes in, and how to balance the right answer for right now versus the right answer for the future, to build something that's really going to work for your business. And I think fundamentally there are four criteria you should be thinking about when you're determining what goes into your EVP. The first one, I think, often gets missed, is it coherent? Does it tie to what your business is actually trying to do? And is it intrinsically linked to your strategy? There's a number of reasons why this is important. Firstly, if it's coherent, you'll get sign-off much more easily, but it's also immediately, therefore, aligned to the brand and has some longevity because it's built around the business plan. The second one, I think, is probably slightly more obvious, is it needs to be competitive, because otherwise you're going to struggle to differentiate yourself from your competitors in the war for talent. The third point is around credibility. This is important from a decency point of view, in that you should tell the truth to job seekers. But also, the problem you'll have if you produce an EVP that isn't credible is that it'll fall over once you start trying to recruit brand ambassadors and actually launch the thing, because no one will understand it or believe in it. And last but not least, of course, is that it needs to be compelling. It has to be things that your target audience actually want externally. Otherwise, why are we bothering with it at all? And so the question comes, how are you going to trade off these different factors, and how do you work out, whether something makes the bar? And I saw someone from a marketing background share a marketing Venn diagram recently to try and determine what belongs in a consumer brand. I thought it was maybe a useful idea. However, unfortunately, what they produced wasn't a Venn diagram. It was an Euler diagram, which is a subtle distinction, but I'm going to explain what the difference is and what constitutes a Venn diagram. So we're going to construct the ultimate EVP Venn diagram here. First thing to say is this is not a Venn diagram, because not all the sets overlap and there's nothing in the overlaps, and it's just four circles on a page, which is lovely, but it's not really a Venn diagram. It doesn't help us to understand the overlaps. If we start looking at something like this, where we've got our sets A, B, C, and D, and now we've got the overlaps, and we go, oh, this is looking pretty good for being a Venn diagram. I'm afraid technically it isn't. This is an Euler diagram, because a Venn diagram must show all possible overlaps. And what we don't have here is A and C on their own without B and D, or indeed B and D on their own without A and C. So it's close but no cigar. Now you can produce a four-set Venn diagram, and I have done an example of a valid four-set Venn diagram for you here. So here we have our sets A, B, C, and D, and all the possible combinations of those different things. So let's start putting it together with our four criteria, and labeling these four sets. So set A is things that are coherent and tied to the strategy. How are we going to work out what those are? Well, you're going to start by looking at the business plan and going, right, if this is what our business is trying to do, what does that mean for people? And that might involve talking to some senior stakeholders. Those of you who work with me on an EVP project will know that's one of the first things I always ask to do is, can I speak to people who run your business about what they're trying to do and what that means for people? But also you might find answers to this in the people plan. If that's been built from the business plan, it should be in there. Set B is things that are competitive, things where you outperform competitors. This is where you might do a competitor audit, or you could commission an agency to do a competitor audit for you. But also your TA community have some knowledge here. They know how you stack up against different competitors for talent. But also new hires can be very, very valuable for their insight on this. They'll be able to give you that comparison point to the places they've come from. Set C, for things that are credible. This is stuff that you may well have existing data sets from a staff survey, or you might decide to do something bespoke with focus groups. But also sometimes you can pick this up by looking at the hiring briefs you've had for talent campaigns over recent times. Anything that's repeatedly cropping up as a potential selling point in there is looking pretty credible. And last but not least is compelling, things your target audience actually want. And this is obviously where you need to get hold of some external data, whether it's stuff you've commissioned or stuff that you simply bought off the shelf. There's lots of good stuff around in early talent. It tends to get a lot more patchy once we get into experienced hire, and that's where TA knowledge becomes vastly important. You should have a good understanding of what people are looking for. So those are our four sets. We can now label up our Venn diagram, and we've got set A, set B, set C, and set D all together. Right, so let's start thinking about what these overlaps actually mean for us. So obviously our holy grail is things that belong in that middle and things that are A, B, C and D, coherent, competitive, compelling and credible. I'm going to be honest with you. Normally when I do a client project, we're lucky if we've got one thing in there, maybe two on a really, really fortunate project. But actually a lot of the time you really struggle to find things that are all of those things. But you don't need to despair, because something doesn't have to fulfill all of these criteria to be useful. And actually it's worth looking at things that don't quite meet that bar. And in particular, things that are 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 isn't bad, surely. So let's think about what's in those segments. So if something's in segment A, B, D, we're saying this is something that's coherent, competitive and compelling, but it's not credible. So these are things that are potential attractors, but your own staff aren't buying them. And sometimes that's not necessarily because it's not true. It might be that your own staff have got so used to it, they don't think of it as being a good selling point. Familiarity breeds contempt. And particularly with long-serving staff, you can have something that is a good selling point, but they're not really recognising, because their comparison point is perhaps a rose-tinted view of how things used to be at your company 20 years ago, rather than the actual external competitor set that are out there right now. If we think about what's in set A, B, C, so these are things that are coherent, competitive and credible, but they're not compelling. Now you tend to get quite a lot of stuff in here, and these are things that you're really proud of internally, but the external audience just don't connect with. I'm afraid a lot of things belong in here that might be to do with your purpose and your mission and your values, and things that have huge resonance with your internal staff, but that external audience just aren't going to connect with them unless you can persuade them of the relevance and why it's going to bring them some benefit. Things that are in set A, C and D. So these are things that are credible, compelling and coherent, but they're not competitive. These are things that are good selling points, but that your competitors can make as well. Now these are still worth making, if for no other reason that if you don't make them, you're handing that competitive territory to your competitors for talent. And they're often the good features of working in an industry. So let's say you're in a tech company, you would expect innovation to fall into this category. You're probably good at it, but so should all your competitors be as well. Doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about it, but it's probably not going to differentiate you. Then set B, C, D, things that are competitive, credible and compelling, but not coherent. Now these are things that we're saying are basically going to work in attraction and work in retention, but aren't really anything to do with the business plan. These are great and probably do belong in your EVP, could include something incidental like the location that you happen to be in. What you do need to be aware of, though, is that when you take this to senior stakeholders for their approval, they might be a bit dismissive of things in here because it's not aligned to that business strategy, which is where their heads tend to be. So that's the thing that scored 3 out of 4. Is there anything worth exploring in the 50-50 category? Well, I think there is, and let's go around the circle and see what's in there. So if we think about things at the top in segment A, B, so these are things that are coherent and competitive. These are things from your business plan that do make you different from your competitors, but aren't going to be that relevant to your internal audience or your external audience. Things that are in here are probably not going to ever be an EVP selling point, but these are things that might well be part of your brand as an organisation. So they are still important and still relevant for us to keep an eye on. Things that are in segment BC, these are things that are competitive and credible. And when you think about it, these are things that are going to come out really well if you've done a big internal research program. These might have scored really, really well, but we're saying that as soon as we run it past the senior leadership, they're going to go, well, I don't see what that's got to do with the business plan. And indeed, if we put it to the external audience, it's not really going to resonate very well with them. It might be something, however, that's incredibly valuable from a retention point of view, like a particularly valued element of the benefits package. If something's in segment AC, we're saying it's credible and coherent. So it's true and it makes sense, but it's not particularly differential or particularly attractive. And it might be tied to a plus of working in your industry, but one that the external audience don't really get yet. So, for example, it might be saying, actually, when you work in a recruitment advertising agency, having a brand and insight function is incredibly useful and valuable, and you're going to love working with them. However, if someone doesn't yet work in that kind of agency environment, they don't understand why that would be in any way relevant or important. But I'll leave it up to my colleagues to tell you whether that's actually valid there at all. If we look at something that's in segment CD, we're saying this is something that's credible and compelling, but it's not really part of the plan or any different from your competitors. You run across these a lot. These are things that I would call features of industries that don't necessarily need to be the case. So the extraordinarily high standard of stationery at law firms, for example, would belong in this category. It's not differential. It is true and it's quite nice, but it's not going to differentiate you. If we look at segment BD, these are things that we're saying are competitive and compelling. Gosh, these would be good selling points if only they were true. And these might be things that we start thinking about, okay, is it worth trying to get these onto the change agenda? Because actually there would be some real power in these things if we could make them true. However, they're not really part of the business strategy right now. If we've got something that's in segment AD, this is something that's actually a little bit worrying. This is something that should be true, looking at the business plan, and our external audience would really want it. But right now, your staff aren't feeling it, and we certainly aren't outperforming the competition either. So again, this is something that's really points towards a change agenda point. Last but not least, let's whiz around and complete the final 4 segments, which are the ones that are only in one category, and that might just be worth thinking about for a second. So if something's only coherent, this is the bit of the strategic plan you're really struggling to get staff involved in. It's probably never going to be an EVP selling point, and you're not going to use it externally, but it might well be one of the underlying reasons why the employee engagement score is a bit poor in the staff survey. So it might well be a deep interest to anybody involved in internal communications and engagement. If we've got something in segment B, we're saying it's only competitive. This is something we happen to do better than competitors, but literally nobody cares. Our own staff don't care, the external talent market don't care, and nor do our leadership. And believe it or not, I have run across these once or twice. One example that springs to mind, a client rang me up and said they'd come top in a ranking that they didn't even know existed until the ranking got in touch. Oh, we've come top for this. Should we put it on the careers website? And I fairly quickly said, well, no, because literally nobody cares about this. It's not going to persuade anyone of anything. And you're going to look quite silly when you try and take it to the senior leadership as well. So you do get things in this category, but I would say it's comparatively rare. Things in segment C get a bit more interesting. So these are things that are only credible, and these shouldn't be belittled because they're probably doing quite an important job with retention again. However, these are things that are definitely not going to be relevant as soon as we go into external recruitment, and you shouldn't put them on the careers website. I've seen things that fall into this category sneak into employee videos, and you get an employee talking about something that is clearly quite important to them, and they think that you do well. However, it's not different from the competition. It's not interesting to your target audience, and it's got nothing to do with the strategy. Probably doesn't belong in that video. Last but not least, things that are only compelling. Well, actually, these are things that are just not you. It's what the audience want that you can in no respect deliver on, and you don't really intend to either. And these tend to crop up in exit interviews. You'll find something, and it's what you might call the legitimate reasons to leave you and go elsewhere. And they're things that your leadership are basically okay with the idea that competitors are better than you. So we've been around all the individual overlaps. What do and don't I think belong in the EVP? Well, hopefully you caught some of it as I went along. But I'd say obviously everything in A, B, C, D, of course, belongs in your EVP. But actually, things that belong in the 3 out of 4 categories mostly make it. But actually, even on top of that, there are a few things that are in the 2 out of 4 categories that I'd say, depending on what they are and depending on the nature of them, could well sneak into your EVP model. Obviously, if you're looking at what you're going to take externally, you want to focus on the things that are entirely within that compelling set, because that's what's going to persuade that audience. If you're thinking about what you're going to use internally to engage people, that's where a few more things sneak in over on the other side in that set C, the credible set, because these are things that are making people feel engaged and part of your organisation. These are the things that I think are interesting and often missed because they're not really part of the EVP. However, they could become part of the EVP if something could be done about them. And these definitely can form part of a change program internally. And very often HR directors are very interested in anything that falls into any of these categories. Final word I'd give, though, is that in reality, of course, nothing falls beautifully into one of these segments. And the decision about whether something is or isn't competitive or isn't coherent and is or isn't credible is actually quite subjective. And this is where you're going to have to use your judgment or indeed take on external consultants like me to help you decide, okay, on balance, this one is compelling, on balance, this one isn't competitive. To help you work out roughly where we think these things lie. But hopefully that's been an interesting way of looking at how you trade off these different competing criteria for what should and shouldn't be in your EVP. If you'd like to talk to me about that further, or indeed something a little less confusing and diagrammatic further, then please do get in touch, whether it's as part of this event or at a later event. I put up my email address and my LinkedIn profile there. I'd love to speak to you more about anything to do with EVPs or indeed employee communications or recruitment advertising. Thanks for your time.